and another gospel, then they're still in Jerusalem. And the point is, you're assuming that these are meant to give us a day-by-day itinerary of what's going on after the resurrection, and it's just not their intention to do. And so when you keep that in mind, and keep in mind that probably the person you're talking to, sitting in the seat next to you on the plane or at the bus stop or whatever else it might be, if they say, well, I just can't believe the Gospels because, what happened after the resurrection? Well, it depends on which Gospel you read. As soon as you hear anybody say, it depends on which Gospel you read, you know that they have been watching way too many Bart Ehrman videos on YouTube. And that means they're getting all this stuff secondhand. They've not actually looked at it themselves. And with someone like that, it's fairly easy to say, well, have you ever really honestly looked at the Gospels themselves and asked, what if I were to be fair to these people? If I were to treat them with even a portion of the fairness that I would want to be treated with, for my writings to be treated with, is that the conclusion I would come to? Sometimes you can get a conversation going that way, but most people are just repeating things that they have been told they actually haven't heard. So when we look at where we are right now, we had just last time seen the report of the women to the disciples. And we have a much fuller, not surprising, account of what takes place coming from John. And so she tells Simon Peter and the other disciples, so by tradition, Peter and John, Peter then came out with the other disciple and went toward the tomb. They both ran, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. And stooping to look in, he saw the linen clothes lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came following him and went into the tomb, and he saw the linen clothes lying, and the napkin which had been on his head, not lying with linen cloths, but rolled up in a place by itself. So, you get all the speculation that Peter's the old dude, John's the young dude. So the young dude outruns the old dude. Which unfortunately does happen a lot. And I say as an old dude who frequently gets blown by while running by young people. And I just go, well, my days of doing that have long passed. But anyway, Simon, and then of course you have then the other disciple who reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed, for as yet they did not know the scripture that he must rise from the dead. Immediately you go, but how many times had Jesus said these things? Well, I sort of mentioned this years ago when we looked at Matthew chapter 16, when Jesus is speaking to Simon, and he says, the Son of Man must be betrayed, so on and so forth, and rise again the third day. It's almost like as soon as they heard die, betrayed, everything else just became like any adult speaking in Charlie Brown. It just goes in one ear, out the other. Doesn't seem to be any recognition of what this is supposed to mean. And we may struggle with that because we have the luxury of not being deeply influenced by the traditions and the traditional beliefs about the Messiah that would have deeply impacted the disciples themselves. The idea of a crucified Messiah was just simply not something that would have crossed anyone's mind at that point in time. Certainly there were all sorts of discussions of the Messiah, but the idea of suffering, substitution, the traditions had developed around deliverance and rulership over the nations, not the idea of the suffering servant. And so we see that, and John believes. Is it because John was younger and hence wasn't quite as crusty in his traditions? Possible. But for as yet they did not know the scripture that he must rise from the dead is more of a description explaining why Peter didn't believe than it is why John did believe. Yes, sir.
So the Jews there was no substitutionary atonement for the Messiah when he
Not really.
When he came.
No, I mean, you can find later on there develops ideas where the deaths of rabbis become substitutionary and things like that. But during the intertestamental period, because Israel was under the heel of all these world powers, the focus was upon deliverance from those world powers, not upon some kind of substitutionary atonement. I mean, Isaiah 53 was there, but there were all sorts of...
The government would rest on his shoulders and all that stuff.
Well, yeah, I'd say Isaiah 9, but, it was there. They just did not see it as something that would involve the death of the Messiah at the hands of the Romans. I mean, that just didn't cross anybody's mind. Yes, sir?
In John 11, how do you reconcile what Titus says when he says that one man should die for the people and that the whole nation should not perish?
Yeah, it says he was functioning as a high priest, was prophesying. It wasn't because that was an understanding of the Jews that day. It wasn't because there was, we know that the Messiah is going to atone for the sins of Israel by dying or something like that. He was simply saying it's better that we kill this guy than the Romans come and take the rest of us away, not realizing what that actually meant and how that was going to work out. So, yeah. So John is just explaining why one believed and one doesn't. And it's more of an explanation as to why Peter doesn't than it is why John did. Because at the time John would be being written, everybody would assume, well, everybody knows the prophecies. I mean, by now that was the essence of almost every service when the Christians gathered, to be a recitation of fulfilled prophecies in Jesus and things like that. Then the disciples went back to their homes. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb, and as she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet. And they said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "Because they have taken away my Lord. I do not know where they have laid him." Saying this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing, but she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom do you seek?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher, or of course as we would have rabbi. Jesus said to her, "Do not hold me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brother and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God."